Hello, hi everyone. I'm Aditya. I'm Chief Marketing Officer at Across the Globe, and I'll be your host for today. I welcome all of you on the last session of Enlightening July webinar series by Across the Globe. For today's session, the topic of today's session is demystifying artificial intelligence, and we have Mr. Jitendra Kumar with us on today's session of Across the Globe Enlightening July webinar series. Am I audible to you? Can someone please confirm in the chat if my voice is clear to everyone? Geeta, can you please confirm in the chat if I'm audible? All right, thanks a lot, guys. So I welcome everyone. Let me tell you what exactly Across the Globe is. Across the Globe is a social network platform for like-minded professionals where they can connect, collaborate, grow, and inspire each other. So you can connect to people with similar interest or personal interest, share your experiences and knowledge, provide and get feedback, talk about the things you love with people, collaborate and grow. You can remain updated about the events and meetups, meet interesting people who can change your life for good. You can even apply to the jobs or internship relevant to your interests. Our application is live on both the stores, both app stores. Our Android application is live on Google Play Store, and we have recently launched our iOS application. Let me take you through the application. So once you have downloaded the application, you can search for your interest group. And if you are an engineer and want to connect with engineers, you can just type engineers here and connect with your tribe of people, your community of people. If you love dancing, you can connect with dancers. If you love music, you can connect with musicians. If you love philosophy, you can connect with philosophers also. So this is the homepage of our application where you'll get to see articles, jobs, internships, meetups, events from your kind of people, from your tribe, and from your interest group that you have chosen. If you like any article, you can even upvote that article on the platform and share that article on any of the social media handles that you have. So now if you want to connect with some, let us say photographers nearby, you can just select photographers, and as you can see here, these are all the photographers nearby me. I can visit their profile, connect with them, see if they have any job opportunities or event listed or any meetups listed that I can join. If you are an yoga teacher, yogi, and if you want to connect with yogis nearby, you can just select yogis. If you love dancing and want to connect with some, let us say hip hop dancers, you can even do that. If you are a startup enthusiast and want to connect with some startup enthusiasts nearby you, we have covered for you. We have that covered for you. So you can post any article related to your interest group on the platform. You can even ask questions and discuss doubts with the experts that we have on board. You can even post any image on the platform related to your interest group. So let us suppose if I'm traveling to Pune next week and I want to see what my kind of people, what my tribe is exactly doing in Pune before actually reaching Pune, you kind of teleport yourself to Pune. I'll just change my location to Pune here. And as you can see, I'll get to see what exactly my kind of people, my tribe is doing in Pune. What are the jobs that are actually available in Pune? What are the events that are happening in Pune? All right. So for today's session of Enlightening July webinar series by Across the Globe with the topic Demystifying Artificial Intelligence, we have Mr. Jitendra Kumar with us. Hello, uh, Jitendra sir, am I audible to you?
Yeah, hey Aditya, I can hear you perfectly.
Yeah,
Hi, all
how are
of you.
you?
Yeah, I'm good. How about you?
I'm good. I'm good too. I'm good. So let me, folks, let me introduce Mr. Jitendra Sharma to you. Mr. Jitendra is an experienced data scientist, sorry, my bad, carrying 5+ years applied industrial experience in machine learning, deep learning, computer vision, and NLP, that is natural language processing, across multiple domains. He is right now working as a full-time data scientist in one of the major American airlines to solve aviation analytics problems. He has also worked with Tata Consultancy Services in its analytics and insights division. All right, sir, over to you. Just one question I want to ask. Do you want the chat section to be open or should I close it?
I'm not aware of the format what you guys follow. So if it's that you need to take up all the questions at the last, I'm fine with that as well. If the audience, what we can do is if the audience raises out his hands on to the Zoom
Mm-hmm.
chat, then we can probably allow them to chat it out, and they can probably ask out the
Sure,
question.
then I'll handle that part. And if at the end, if we are trying to, conduct Q&A session, I'll moderate that for you.
Yeah, sure, sounds good.
Sure. So you have the host permissions. I'll stop sharing my screen. You can start with it now.
Doing it. Let me know once you're able to see my screen.
Yeah, your screen is visible.
Is this chat section also visible? The Zoom one? You can see the like slides in full, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So let me start out. So yeah, thanks Adit for those wonderful introductions. So I'm really as enthusiastic as you are in presenting out this topic and sharing out my knowledge, what I have learned around in these 5 years, and sharing it the wider audience for their benefits. So I have a lot of things to cover based on my experience. I'm not aware what all I would be able to cover in these like fixed interval of time, but I would try to do the best for the audience. So let's quickly jump in. So as you know, this topic is demystifying artificial intelligence for computer vision. So although the topic looks so scary, but it's not that much scary. I would probably try to do justice for that, and let's probably dive into these details. So the format that I'm going to follow along is there are a bunch of different topics that I would introduce you to. It might not be probably in the entirety of what the topic are, what they are. It's more of to give you a context of what's going in the computer vision field across the industry, how people are using it, what's IoT, like a lot of different buzzwords that you keep on hearing in your day-to-day life. So I will try to just briefly touch upon those topics, and I will also try to go into depth of few of the topics that I feel might be interesting to you all. Like looking into the CNNs, what they are. Can all of you just mute out your mic? Thank you. So I would just try to touch upon all those different topics and introduce you to a few of those buzzwords like CNNs, what convolution neural networks are, what are the different techniques available in computer visions like detections, localizations, segmentations, and all those things. I have a few good examples of so you can relate it to how that what they are and how they look like in action. At the end, I also have one code example as well. So I'm not sure whether I would be able to cover it or not, but I would anyway share it with you so you can just play around with it and can build out your like a baby example of how to do image classifications. And when I say image classifications, that the SOTA results that industry is using, that is state of the art results. So it's not that hard. So let's probably dive in. So for diving in, I would just probably just play around one video to get all your attentions towards this topic. So I'm not sure how many of you are sleeping, but after looking at this video, probably you would be awake and give just to listen to me. So let's dive in.
It's a little too close for comfort, lady. What, you never seen a talking gargoyle before? Welcome to Illuminati headquarters. I mean, Denver International Airport.
So awesome.
Hello? Do I know you?
Are you hungry?
Oh, I'm starving. You got anything for me? Those flowers look delicious. Oh, it's because of the conspiracy. Look at me. I'm a little know-it-all. Will you get back over here? I got a question about this conspiracy. Did you have to buy an extra seat for your hat, sir? Sir, are you stealing a desk? Sir, you have resting, confused face. Do you have a favorite animal or pet? A caterpillar? Wouldn't you rather have a gargoyle? Yes. You know, you can actually put the phone down and have a conversation with me. But no, I'm a millennial. I've got to post it. I've got to snap face it and Twitter book it. Excuse me, miss, I've got a stain that needs some polishing. Can I borrow your cleaning cart? I need your help. Guess what my favorite food is?
What?
No, I want you to guess. Cumin. Yes, I love cumin.
I said human.
Oh, I thought you said cumin. I'm a real big spice guy. Furry hat guy. I can't believe you are wearing one of my friends.
Hey, this isn't your friend.
It used to be until you put it on your head, man.
How old are you?
Well, 243 years old now. I look good for my age, don't I?
Have to work out.
All the time. You should see my squats.
You're such a sweet talker.
Will you take me back home with you?
Let's go. I have some space in my backpack.
Actually, I think you have too much baggage for me.
I'm not sure whether all of you were able to hear that. Can anyone just confirm? Were you able to hear that noise? Adit, can you confirm? Okay, yeah. So I got that. Okay, how was it? Can you just write down quickly? Did you like it? How was it? Okay. Yeah. So it's one of the application at Denver International Airport. So as you all know, I'm like like aviation enthusiast. I'm working as a in aviation, so I keep on just following along all those interesting happenings in the aviation field. So this is one of them. So this is installed at Denver International Airport. So it's amalgamations of a lot of different things. It uses computer vision. It uses human supervision. So it's a lot of different things. It's just not computer vision, just not deep learning, just not like machine learning and all those things, but some amalgamations of a lot of different things. Okay, so now I've built up the context. Now let's quickly jump into the details. So the first thing that we're going to discuss is about the history of computer vision. So computer scientists whose dot is again and again asking me for the remote control of my screen. Can you please excuse me for that? Okay. So computer vision around the world is not that much. It's not that much new. It's around 50. The history carries is around 50 years old. So computer scientists around the world have been trying to find ways to make machine extract meaning from visual data for about 50 years now. And the history of computer vision, which most people don't know much about, is deeply fascinating. So it goes to as far as 16th century, where we started out with the first camera, that was the pinhole camera, where there was a small pin and the light used to just pass into that pin, and we used to just make up the images based on the different shadows that were just coming out to the light, and we were just encapsulating it into some sort of a paper and then crafting it around. Moved over to 1959, where the two of the great scientists, Whipple and Wiesel, just try to understand and explain how mammals' vision works. That is, just eliminating all different objects in front of the cat and seeing how the neuron fires up and how those things happen. Then we moved over to 1970, where there was a visual representation by Ma. There was an interesting report where it talks about 3D objects and how it used to be represent how it can be represented to a computer vision system. We moved over to 1973 to 79, where there was a pictorial structure by Fischer and Nilsens in 1973, and generalized lenses by Brooks and Instructions that used to happen. Then we moved over to 1989. This was one of the big breakthrough when Professor Jan LeCun just came up with the handwritten zip code recognitions using back propagations. So most of you might have heard of that. So what the system used to work was they used to just point out the camera towards the code, the zip code that was written on the postcards, and they created out an automated system that can just extract out the written zip codes from those postcards. So this was in 1989. Moved over to fast forward to 2006 to 2012. So this was the year where the major breakthrough happened. So there was something called as ImageNet competition that we would be seeing in the future slide, and there was something called as CNN that came into the context, and CNN was applied to a Pascal VOC, that is Visual Object Challenge, across 20 different categories, and it was the year when machine vision was able to surpass the human vision. So if you just look at how the actual meaning of computer vision, what it is, how does it make sense? So the goal of computer vision, I'm just reading it out for you aloud, so you can just follow it along. The goal of computer vision is to extract useful information from images. This has proved a surprisingly challenging task. It has occupied thousands of intelligent and creative minds over the last 4 decades, and despite this, we are still far from being able to build a general purpose machine learning system. So this was in 2012 where the one of the research scientists wrote it down. So for us, it looks like computer vision is so much easy because we don't relate it to how beautifully our brain has been like engineered in a way that we can, by just looking at the pictures, we can say, oh, so this is the thing that's going in the picture. These are the different objects that are going on. This is the depth of the scene. These are the number of people that are present in the scene and all those things. But when we try to code it along into the computer vision systems or the computer program, it's really difficult because we are not actually aware of what's going behind the scene. How's the brain actually making sense out of it? What are the different processings that's going inside the brain in just looking at or just converting those images into those some sort of form that can be digestible to us. So why are you even talking about computer vision? So this has become possible right now because of the data and powerful computing that we have got at our disposal. So video is the biggest big data. So when I say video, it includes obviously images as well. So video is nothing but a combinations of different images that we have got, right? So we have got over 70% of today's internet traffic. So it's video, right? Over 300 hours of video is uploaded on YouTube every minute. Over 500 million hours of video surveillance collected every day. Just think about a number of CCTVs that are installed in your areas, and just think about the number of cameras, that you are just carrying around in your pockets, right? You have got your front camera, you have got your back camera. So there is one of the studies that suggests the number of cameras over the entire earth is more than the number of people that are present, because technically actually you're just carrying around 2 cameras all the time in your phone, right? So you have got around billions or trillions of different cameras that you have got. And just look at the content that's created through Facebook, Insta, like YouTube, Amazon, Hulu, Netflix. A lot of powerful limited a lot of data that's getting created out of this. Just think about drone. What's the quantity and the quality of data that's creating? So make sense out of all these things. We need some sort of a computer vision system to just make out of these data, right? And why is it even possible? So this this has become possible because of the number of compute, the enormous compute that we have got. Now we have got enormous amount of compute and CPUs, that is central processing unit. We have got small models that can run on CPU. We have small data sets that can run on CPU, and this is useful for design and space exploration. We have got GPU. We have all heard of GPU, right? So this is a very powerful graphical processing unit. These are mainly for medium to large model data sets, and this is mainly used in image and video processing, and applications are on CUDA and OpenCL. Now there are two other things that you might not aware of, that is TPU and FPGA. So TPU stands for processing unit, so it's something new. Google is heavily investing in it around. So if you regularly follow Kaggle and the research community, there are a lot of different researches that have been going on in how to efficiently use TPUs for matrix computations and dense vector processing. Now we have even got something called as FPGAs. So FPGAs is field processing graphic and arrays. So it's something for specifically for video analytics, and it's very good in large data sets and models. It's compute intensive applications and high performance cost ratio. So FPGAs are something that are normally used in edge devices, that's IoT devices that are installed at the edge to look at what are the different things that are going around. So I would probably just pause around here, and I would just probably look out for questions if any one of you have any. Do we have any questions? Is it Ravendra Deore? Adit, can you just enable the chat?
Yeah, the chat is enabled.
I'm not able to see it. Probably. Let me just move over to the chat. So, not, Adit, can you see any questions that's there? If not, I can probably move on.
Yeah, one question is, what is the full form of TPU and FPGA?
So TPU is tensor processing unit, and FPGA is field programmable graphical array. Not sure I'm just keeping it right, but FPGA is field programmable graphical array.
Already, that was the only question.
Oh, it's field programmable gate arrays. So yeah, my bad. So FPGAs are normally used in like IoT applications. That's taking sense. And TPU is Google is investing a lot in TPUs, and what they are trying to do is they are trying to replace GPUs with TPUs. So TPUs is more of, because if you have got a chance to go into the like the nitty gritty of what they are, so GPUs is mainly for like graphical renderations and like high inference video, like those what do you say, ray tracing and all those things. If you have seen Avatar, so there were like a bunch of GPU farms that was used in creating out that movie. TPU is it's mainly focused on doing matrix computations and dense vector processing. So let's move on. So let's talk about ImageNet competition, because this was one of the breakthrough movement that happened in the like in the world of computer vision. So the ImageNet large-scale visual recognition challenge evaluates algorithms for object detection and object classification at large scale. It was held between 2010 to 2017. One high-level motivation was to allow researchers to compare progress in detection across a wide variety of objects, taking advantages of quite expensive labeling effort. Another motivation was to measure the progress of computer vision for large-scale image indexing for retrieval and annotation. So what happened? What used to happen was every year there were like a corresponding workshop at one of the premier computer vision conference. The purpose of that workshop was to present the methods and results of the challenge. Participants were were the with the most successful and innovative entries were invited to present. The goal of the challenge was to both promote and development and better computer vision techniques and to benchmark the state of the art results. So just look at this graph. So uh, the x and y. So x is the number of x is the years and y is the errors. So just look at this is there was something called as ResNet that was introduced, and it was the first architecture that was able to beat out the humans in the task of computer, like a computer vision. And when I say computer vision, it was more of just looking at the images, just classifying into different categories. And the first deep architectures was introduced in 2012. That was AlexNet, if all of you have heard of. So this was the first deep architectures that was based on convolution neural network, and it was until 2015 that we were able to first beat the human intelligence in the sense of like a computer vision. So this happened. So we know in 2015 that something that can beat the human vision is loosely inspired by, or I would say like a tightly inspired by something called as convolution neural network. So let's look at it. Why even we need this convolution neural network to do computer vision? So just look at this image. I can see it's a big elephant that's visible. So let's say we want to create out an image classification system based on the bunch of images that we have got. And what we are doing is that we are hand coding out all those features. What we are saying is, okay, I would probably just hand code out all this particular task for image classification by myself. I'm a very good software programmer, and I would just encode it myself. I would say that if there I can see 4 legs in the image, I would probably raise a flag that it's the high probability that it's an elephant. If it has got trunk, if it has got it's a teeth, a long teeth, if it got big eyes, got big ears, a big tummy, I would say that that's an elephant. And I've like looked at bunch of different images, and at the end of the day, I just came up with one system that I would say, okay, I've just built up one solution that's able to classify the images into whether it's an elephant or not an elephant by looking at the image. But let's see what happened when a new test image comes to your data set. What would you do now? Because your system didn't probably see these type of images, right? There are a bunch of different. There's hard of elephants that we are seeing. There are 4 to 5 different elephants, and just imagine about and even look at the quality of the images. It's not crisp clear, right? It's like kind of blurry. But we as humans can just say that, okay, this is a herd of elephants. We know that we know in entirety that there are a few features that we need to look at to consider it as an elephant, but we cannot directly code it along into the computer system to just flag it as an elephant or not an elephant. So this is the problem that we normally go through, and this was something that was like introduced in 2015 and even in 2012 to build those deep architectures to just encapsulate out those features and create out some model that can just classify these images and can label it out as whether it's like an elephant or not an elephant. So the high level approach for CNNs are that we have the bunch of inputs. We instead of we us doing feature engineering and classification and then doing the output, what we are doing is in the deep learning approach, we are just replacing this feature learning and classifications with something called as neural network. That is learning and classifying that in a single step, and then it's processing the like all the features that are there and processing that into the some sort of an output. So for a computer, the image is just a bunch of numbers. Like even if you just read along in this entire computer vision journey, and if you look at the image, and if you just try to give it to the computer, what computer sees is a bunch of different numbers. So for computer, it doesn't see that these are the trunks, these are the different teeth, these are the legs. All it matters for him, all it matters to the computer is a bunch of numbers. We need to create out a way of just encapsulating out those numbers into some sort of like a simple features that can be used for the end goal. That's for in this case is the classification. So the the summary of the story is we need to come up with some sort of a neural network that is able to just offload this task from us and can automatically do it for you. So this was something that was introduced in like 2012, and the latest architecture that was introduced in 2015. So when you say ResNet, GoogleNet, VGG, AlexNet, this is the magic where it happens. So we can replace this neural network with a ResNet, AlexNet, or GoogleNet, or whatever network that you have got, and you can just code it along, and you can just create out a system that's able to just visualize out by giving it any input or what are the output that we can get. So this is the deep learning approach, and this is a very high level idea of what's going behind the scene. We would digest it into. I would briefly touch upon what does happen behind the scene and how does it goes. So let's look at the feature slide. So as I said, like for the computer, this image is nothing but a bunch of different numbers, right? So we have got this image, we pass into the computer system, and what it sees is these bunch of zeros and ones. So it's images in its binary. And for the rest of the folks who you already know how the system works, let's say it's a color image, we would have we would have this sort of a matrix in 3 dimensions. So we would have one for R, one for G, and one for B. So RGB and different matrices that we would have got. Then we would do the convolutions that I talked about. So these convolutions are different layers, and it's doing this is the area where all that magic is happening. It's learning about all those features. So it's learning about what's going behind the scene, what are the different ears, what are the different trunks, and all those things. So I've just taken an example of in this case of an elephant, but you can just imagine of anything that you can see. Like just probably look at like a scenery where we are seeing a lot of bunch of different green grasses, house, and all those things. So the CNN is trying to learn out those different low-level features. And by low-level features, I mean it might be as simple as just learning about gradients, just learning about color flow, just learning about. So that's something that's learning into the feature engineering. And then we have got something called as classification. So classification is doing nothing but it's outputting out a probability to just qualify that image as whether it's an elephant or not an elephant. So this is a very high level. I know I might have just confused you a lot. So let's just forget about CNNs and just try to understand this from to this example. So this is a very high level idea. Just replace these 4 different blue boxes that you are seeing. It's a kind of a neural network that's going behind the scenes. So what it's learning is we give this neural network a bunch of images. So let's say our task at hand is just to classify between those 2 images into like one of the category, whether just trying to figure out whether the given image is a cat or a dog. So this is a 2-way classification. So what we are doing is we are just passing this image to this neural network. And when I say passing that image, obviously it's going to convert this image into pixels of zeros and ones, and then going to pass it through this like a fancier deep neural network, and it will generate out an output. So we already know the ground truth, right? We already know that this image that we have given to the system is a cat. So the neural network will learn, okay, this is a cat, I got it, okay? And the got it, when I'm saying a got it, this is a high level interpretation of that it's doing some sort of back propagations and trying to change out the weights and try to learn out those different weights that are there in this neural network. So I would introduce you to what weights are, but this is something that's on a very high level overview that's going. So even if we just take an example of a dog would be converted into the pixels, into a bunch of pixels of zeros and ones. Then it would be passed to this particular network, and then the system would learn, okay, so this is a dog, and this system would actually be learning out the high level representations of different features that's going behind the scene. So I would pause around, and I will just like, I would probably answer out some questions if anyone has. Do we have some question?
I'm waiting for those questions. Let's wait 1 more minute if they're typing. All right. No questions, Jitendra, so far.
Okay, let's move on. So
Yep.
this is an image classification that I have told you. So this is just to classify those images into one of the different buckets.
Jitendra,
Yeah,
am I audible to you?
yeah.
We have some questions. Please
Okay.
specify the use of artificial intelligence in media.
Artificial intelligence in media, I would probably say that's a very big, like a broad field. So in media, probably they're using it for, let's say, I'm not sure how many of you are aware of it or not, but like these, like fancier media channels like ABP News and all those things. Now what they're doing is they are shifting towards recording out those live feeds through like even a single camera, like even a like a pocket camera, like even using like Samsung Galaxy and all those things. So just look at the beauty of like the computer vision. It's due to that they are able to capture all the high level or the very high definition videos through the pocket camera instead of relying on those heavier cameras that we used to see in 2000 or 1990. So that's one application, and they are doing a lot of different things. They are using natural language processing to understand what the comments, trying to look at the sentiments of the people, how they are doing, and trying to just filter it along and trying to just figure it out what are the news that probably users will like, and trying to just play around over those news. So that's a very broad question, but yeah, there are a lot of different applications that are going on.
All right. The second question is from Geeta. She asked, can you explain what pooling process is and why we use it?
What?
Pooling process.
Okay, so pooling is more of to reduce out the kernel size. So let's say the max pooling that we normally use in our neural network is to reduce out the weight. So I don't have a ready-made example here, but you can probably understand it from here. So let's say this is an image, and these are the kernels that are going into these particular images. So what pooling does is it's try to reduce out the size of the image, right? Because if we just go with like all those images, the system wouldn't learn out. So max pooling is more of just to reduce out the size of those of the size of the input image to make it the process faster and easier to train.
All right. So that was the last question.
Okay, let's move along. So this was the image classification that I talked about. Now let's move on. What are the different applications that we have got in the field of computer vision? So there is something called as object localization. So object localization is nothing but we are trying to localize out the object that we are seeing. So let's say when we say apple, we are trying to just build a bounding box around that object and say that this is an apple. When we say donkey, we are saying that these are the donkeys. Sure that these may or may not be donkey, but for the entirety, for the like a sake of convenience, just say that this is the donkey that we are seeing in that particular. For the object detection is a combination of both these two things, that is the image classifications and object localization. So what it tries to learn is that okay, these are the different objects that are present in the image, and what are the different categories of those particular objects. So when it says that this is a person, so it's a GIF that's downloaded and it's a YOLO model like for the people who are interested. So it's trying to learn this out. So the bonding boxes that you're seeing around the person, just look at it. It's saying that these are persons, and over the car, it's saying that it's car, and it's localizing as well. That's some of the stories there. That it's localizing as well as classifying. So that's one example. The instance segmentation is nothing but when we are trying to just segment out those different objects. So it's more powerful than object localization and object detection, that it's even give you a classification on a pixel basis. So on a pixel basis, it says that it's a blue pixel. So blue pixel is everything that's related to a car. The green pixel is something related to trees. The red pixels are something related to different people that we are seeing. So this is instance segmentation, where we are segmenting out each and every pixel in an image. Action classification is nothing but where we are trying to looking at the multiple frames. We are trying to look at trying to just predict out what's the action that particular image, what's the action that's going behind the image. So we can see that uh, it's this person is standing, this is carrying an object, this person is watching. So these are the different the actions object that it's predicting. The model is able to predict. So these are the different things. Like even if you look at, we also have got ground truth. So ground truth is just to say that actually the ground truth was sitting, and the model is predicting or carrying an object and listening to a person. So this is an example of an action classification. Image captioning is when we are trying to just summarize out an image. So this is a it's a combination of both computer vision and natural language processing. So what we are trying to predict is just to summarize out an image. So it's captioning out a man and a woman playing a guitar and some guitar. Okay. So this is image captioning. It works on the principle of attention mechanism on each word. So this is these are the more more used use cases that normally computer vision has got. So any of the applications that you are seeing, it's going to be one or the other way related to all these different fields, right? So there is something called a semantic segmentation. So semantic segmentation is just similar to instance segmentation, but here what we are doing is we are even just trying to predict out the bounding boxes around those different images. So that's an example of semantic segmentation. Okay. Others just stop me if someone has any question. I would
Yeah.
probably keep on moving.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So now let's look at, I told you that there is something called as convolution neural network that works behind the scene of computer vision. But we have got a bunch of different choices, right? We've got a bunch of different researches that are happening behind the scene, and there are a lot of different algorithms that are coming in and going out. So based on your application, just using out it, like selecting out a particular classification, particular algorithm depend on the end use case and a bunch of different factors. You need to trade off between speed and speed to detect and accuracy. So you need to select out whether you're going to reuse your existing infrastructure or you're going to move over to a fancier architecture like GPUs, CPUs, and FPGAs. Other thing is, what about the resource availability? So whether you have got like unlimited time and money at your disposal, whether you have even got like a standard annotation format, or you have got like a labeled data at your disposal, whether how's about your hardware required to train and deploy and use look like. Because what you can do is you can anyway come up with a very fancier or a very accurate model, state of the art model, but your hardware behind the scene doesn't just offer you to deploy it out, right? Because let's say you're just working out for any corporate and you come up with that model that, okay, I have this model and it works really fine, and if you just talk about resources, it's going to use 100 or 200 of GPU. No one is going to listen to you, right? Because you need to think about what are the different resources that are available to us for our deploy, like for our disposal. So that's just kind of a trade-off that you normally you need to do in resource availability. Other thing is, and this is a very interesting and like widely talked about in industry, that is AutoML versus transfer learning versus custom design. So it's the principle of reinventing the wheel. So instead of just training out my model from scratch, why not just use transfer learning to just learn out from the task that's already there. So ImageNet competition that I talked about. So the model that's been trained on the ResNet, AlexNet, on all those models that you normally see. So those are already trained on ImageNet competition, and they know how to just classify out those 1,000 different categories of images. So let's say tomorrow I just go and wanted to build out a system that I wanted to classify five categories of like images into five different categories. So I can probably use transfer learning and take advantage of all the learnings that ImageNet has, all the learning that ImageNet has spent into all those fancier models, and can just train out the custom model for like my application. And the last thing is team skill set. So that's more of you can always come up with those fancier architectures. You can say that I'm going to use CUDA and like deep CNN or DNN and all those things. But who cares? Like if you don't have those team skill sets, no one in your team is aware of all those skill sets, and no one is going to just listen to you. Like the company CEOs just going to say it's not going to just listen to you, right? Other thing is pre-trained models that the pre-trained, when we talk about pre-trained models that are running on TensorFlow, so these are different architectures. So once you define that, okay, I'm going to use of this model for my use case, then you need to think about what is different architectures that I'm going to use. So by architecture, I mean whether we are going to deploy it out on a TensorFlow, or Caffe2, PyTorch, or AnexNet, or CND Android. There are a bunch of different architectures that are already available. Once it's done, we need to think about scalability aspect as well. Let's say I can just build out a model like today, and I can say that this system works on like my laptop. But let's just think of, let's say if you are just working on for aviation, let's something that you build out for your camera. What stakeholder is going to say is, let's, okay, you have built it out, let's deploy it out on 1,000 different CCTVs that we have bought like in our network. What you would do, because you need to even think about scalability as well. Like prototype, building out a prototype is one thing, and making it scalable to just sell it across different platforms or different bunch of different end user devices is the other thing. So you need to take into consideration scalability aspects as well. So looking at all those things, here are some of the options that we have got, and these are the like most widely industrial used like models. That is RCNN, faster RCNN, fast RCNN, YOLO, and SSD. So I'm not going to go into the nitty and gritties of what they are. I would probably leave it to you guys. If you can just go through RCNN, fast RCNN, and all these different models, you can just like digest the beauty of what's going behind the scene and making out these different models, these fancy models, and how you can use it on your application. So this is one graph. So this is something that I was talking in hardware to train, require, train, and deploy and use. So this is it. On the x-axis, it's GPU time, and on the y-axis, it's overall map. So MAP is mean average precision. So what this graph is trying to say is that like ideally what you would need to do, or what you would think of, is that I want like a higher mean average precisions, and I would probably choose something like this. I would probably choose out a model that has got like, for me, accuracy is the best concern, right? If highest accuracy, I'm really good about that. And what you would say is, I'm just going to just care about the y-axis. Okay, well and good. Let's say you decide out a model, but you need to just, when you're going out for deployments and when you're going into the industrial setup, you even need to think about this as well. So this is GPU time. So if you selected out this sort of a model, and if you just look at the x-axis, what's the GPU time it's carrying? And with the GPU, although it comes a lot of different advantage, doing a CPU inferencing versus doing a GPU inferencing, there's a lot of difference. CPU inferencing is always cheaper, and GPU inferencing is always costly. You would need to invest in buying out these GPU rigs, right? So you need to just trade off between your applications and the accuracy that you're trying to solve. So probably now someone might ask a question: when are we going to choose out? When we are just only going to take care about the accuracy systems and just need to forget about GPU time. Just think about some application that's in medical devices, like those X-rays, or those different sonars and all those things that normally happen. No one need to care about investments. There are a bunch of different monies that are coming out, a bunch of into these researches. All they care is accuracy. If you are just off by, let's say, 1 to 2%, it might cost you a human life, right? So you need to take into consideration those aspects as well, versus just thinking about, let's say, a simple image classification model that you're trying to build. No one is going to care about that much about accuracy if you're getting that's manageable. But so at that instant, you're going to like take into consideration those GPU times as well, and trying to decide out what's the sweet spot. Okay, so now let's probably dive into what these biological neurons and ANNs are. Just give me a minute. Okay, yeah, sorry. To create out intelligence, computer scientists took biological inspiration from humans, monkeys, ants, etc. So historically, they took advantages and tried to study it out a lot of different mammals. And to get the high-level idea was to get a very vague understanding of what a brain is. That is, they realized that the brain has something called as neurons, which is a basic building block. So on the left, you can see one biological neuron. This neuron has something called as nucleus, and there's something called as dendrites. What happens when a neuron gets electrical signal inputs from these dendrites? It does some computation inside cell body nucleus and then send these impulses or electrical signals outside towards other neurons, which are then connected to other. So the one other point to note here is that some impulses might have more importance than other impulses. So this is the most simplest takeaway of how a biological neuron functions. So now let's try to just represent this biological neuron mathematically. So let's say we have got a bunch of inputs x1, x2, x3, and xn. And some inputs might be more important than other inputs. So let's say put weights around on these inputs marked as W1, W2, W3, and W4, and Wn. Sorry. So which is actually our observations from biological neurons. So while we get all these inputs, what we will do is we will just sum up all these inputs, and what we would get after that is W1 X1. We would just multiply out these inputs with these weights, and we would get out a summation, right? So this is the output that you would got, that you would get. And after just summing up all these inputs, what we will do is we will apply some sort of a mathematical function, that is some activation function, to generate out an output. So now this output can be input to other neurons, and uh, so this is a very high level understanding of what Rosenfeld did in 1957. So this is just loosely inspired out from biology. So what you are doing is you're just multiplying out those weights with the inputs. Weight are just deciding out how important that particular connection is. So even if you are seeing here, all dendrites doesn't carry out like equal importance, right? There might be some dendrites that are carrying high importance as compared to other dendrites. So this is the reason we have got like these different weights and the different values, and weights is just defining out how important that particular biological neuron is or this artificial neuron is. Then we are just summing it up and applying out an activation function. So activation function can be as simple as a like a sigmoid activation. With sigmoid, what you are doing is that I would probably just sum it along and like multiply it out and sum it along. And what I would say is if the output is greater than 0, then I will say that the neuron is going to fire. By fire, I mean it's going to pass on the information to other neuron. And if it is less than 0, I would not fire it up, and it's going to sit idle. So it's not going to pass out any information to the other neuron. So this is a very high level understanding of what's going behind the biological neuron and how we took like a biological inspirations from that. So now let's look at while the researchers were doing out all these things, what they find out was that neuron doesn't exist alone. So little after this came an era where scientists said that the biological neuron doesn't exist alone. That is, it is connected to other neurons. So on the left, you can see one such biological neuron extracted from a 5 years old brain. So this is a 5-year-old brain child neuron that we have got, and the approximate mathematical interpretation of that. A lot of attempts were really made in making these biological neuron network learn. First successful attempt was made in 1986 by Hinton when he came up with the like a very broad idea of backpropagation. So it was after that this idea of artificial neuron was reality. I hope you all are aware of these terminologies of different layers. That is, we have got something called as input layer, hidden layers, and output layers. We have multiple hidden layers, and most of the time, like these one input and one output layer. The neural network that we have shown here is a depth 2 neural network. So issue with backpropagation that I talked about was it used to fail when we moved over to more deeper artificial neural network. An experiment by scientists suggested that for a real world intelligence, we need neural networks that are about 10 to 100 layer deep. So this was until in 2006, Hinton, that is Jeffrey Hinton, came up with the idea of how to make this deep neural network learn, which ended up not getting noticed until 2012, where deep learning based solution first won ImageNet competition. So this is all is going behind the scenes. So I've just tried to interpret it and try to relate it to how the biological neural network functions and how this artificial neural network works. How the how's the actually network is built up through these biological neural networks. So let's look at the growth of neural networks. So we have seen how biological neuron look like. Let's see how biological neural network grows. So I would probably just ask all of you to just concentrate on this because it's the gist of all the things that's going behind the scene. If you understand this, then no one you understood like I would say 80% of what's going behind the artificial neural network. So let's see. Biological neural network grows is learning from here would be very helpful in deep neural network. So on the left, we can see some part of a child brain scans at different stages of his or her life. So at child's birth, at 7 years of age, at 15 years of age. So scientists took out these images from the child brains at the different instances of his or her life. So uh, let's look at when the child is at its birth, network is not fully grown, right? We can see it out. We don't see enough connections that are going here and there. And when we move over to 7 years of age, we can see few connections that are that going to build up, right? It's keep on building it up. So when a child is at when the person is at its child's birth, the neurons are very sparsely connected because he knows like very few things. He knows how to cry, how to close eyes, how to move body, but he doesn't know anything about that. He doesn't know how to speak, how to visualize, how to recognize, and all those things. But until when it goes to 7 years of age, the neurons, these those biological neurons gets heavily connected out. So with very densely connections, I mean they learn languages, they learn objects, they learn about speeches, right? But there are a few things that they learn about, but they are not useful. Okay, so you can say a 7 years age, 7 years of child that okay, this thing is bad. You don't do this, otherwise, like probably a monster would come and will kill you. Okay, so these are few unnecessary learnings that keep on happening. So what child need to do is like a 15 years of age of child doesn't care about what monster is, right? I'm just talking about Indian child, not yours. So what usually happen is that there are few connections that need to be forgetting. So this is where removing of useless connections happen. So you can relate it to something like if you have some older people in your home, so you would have recognized that they start to fall, they start to unrecognize you, they start to like forget out different things and all those things. Yeah, so what's happened behind the scene is they're kind of these weights that the system has learned is kind of degrading. The connections are getting weak, right? Because like for this system to work, what like brain needs is a lot of different energy. Lot of energy goes into just creating out all these things, right? So that's one thing. So if we just relate out all these informations into an like artificial neural network concept, so it's nothing but learning out different ways, the connections between neurons, whether it's a strong or loose, that is defined by the weights, and optimal data means optimal learning of these weights. So the summary of the story is when you say neural network is learning, it does what it means is it's connecting neurons to the edges. So few of the edges might be connected, few of the edges might be left out, few of the edges might have like a higher weight, few of the edges might not have a higher weight. So that's something that's highly inspired out from uh, biological neurons. So now let's quickly jump over to what the ideal computer vision pipeline looks like. So if you normally see what normally we do in computer vision is normally we play around with the like a video data, and video is, as I said, nothing but like a bunch of different frames that are like equally separated. So what we do is we extract out frame from the video feed, and once you have the frame from the video feed, it's as simple as doing out any of those image localizations, image object detections, object segmentation, and all those fancy things onto that particular image, and then it can be used. So for extracting image extractions, frame extractions, and all those things, we use something called as OpenCV library. Although we can use like a plain Python library to do it, but in industry we normally use OpenCV library because there are a lot of different different use cases and even a lot of different advantages of using it. Once it's done, once the frame is extracted, it's passed through a inferencing request and where the deep learning model is run. And with the deep learning algorithm, when I say it's like a different frameworks, we might have like a face detector based FuseNet model. Like these are all buzzwords. You would probably need to just understand out what are the different models that are going behind the scene. There might be. So I've just written down few examples that it might go, that might go. Okay. Once it's done, obviously, then we can use store out those results in databases on a frame by frame basis, and we can use like a higher end database, which is the database tools like Grafana, and even we can use InfluxDB to just look at how the results look like. And the programming languages is of your choice. I normally use Python. You can use C++, or even people use Java as well. So that's up to decide. So this is a very high level architectures of any computer vision pipeline that you normally build out. So I talked about we use something called as OpenCV. So I'm just going to quickly touch upon this. So it was developed by Intel in 1999, and it's a very cross-flow real-time computer vision application. So if you are seeing a computer vision applications, one or the other scene, it's going to use some OpenCV Python behind the scene. So what this OpenCV Python is, it's a kind of a wrapper that's kind of built over C++. So entire OpenCV is by default coded in C++. And what OpenCV Python does, it's a kind of an API that sits over like a C++ interface to make our life useful. But if someone is well versed in C++, then they can directly use OpenCV without worrying about Python. So one of the advantages of using it, like introduced to Python, was it was easier to integrate it with other libraries, which uses NumPy, for example, libraries such as SciPy and Matplotlib. So we can, it has got quite a good integration with the different libraries that we have got. So this is a kind of a demo from like a OpenCV by applying on those different like a canny edge detections and DNN inference that I just pulled out from internet. So I'm not going to just touch upon what's going behind the scene, but it's the two algorithms that's working in an hand. So just look at the beauty of how it's actually pulling out these patches, these different objects, and trying to look into. So it might have got a lot of different applications. So once you know the edges, you can apply all those different algorithms and can try to predict out what your applications might be. Probably you can just detect out where the persons are and all those things. So this is canny edge detections and DNN inference. It's very good at detecting it out. So just look at it, ignoring out those entire blue water that you're seeing, the clouds that you're seeing, and it's all it's looking at is just the edges, the different edges that's going in. So the autonomous vehicles that you have heard of, it doesn't uses these things, but there are few things that are inspired from these sort of an like applications. Like they normally uses those fancier different architectures or fancier different what do you say hardwares like lidars and like computer vision cameras and all those. Okay, so let's now quickly jump over to, so everyone talks about computer vision. What's normally happen at the edge? Okay, you can build up these fancier solutions, but you need to take into consideration how you're going to make sense out of this. So you need to look at the edge inferencing as well. So what is AI at the edge? So edge is nothing but doing out entire processing where your device is probably located. Let's say you've got a CCTV camera. What you can ideally do is you can just build up a model, just try to just ingest out your data from the CCTV camera through cloud onto your machine, then just do some inferencing, and then can directly just send back the results and then can just detect it out. But we normally need not to care about this, right? But when we are thinking about a very large application, even just doing out those data here and there, it's going to take a lot of different bandwidth and it's going to cost us a hell lot amount of money. So now the industry 2020 and even into this quarter and even from started out in 2018, I think where people are more and more talking about, okay, like what's the AI at the edges, how we can just ship out these on the devices where that's located instead of we just directly ingesting all this data into the cloud or high-end servers and just paying out for the cost for transferring of the data. So there are got a lot of different applications and a lot of different advantages. So it's not just anywhere in the cloud, it's at the edge of the side. So edge applications are often used where low latency is required, where low latency is needed. So just look at, let's say you're looking at a live CCTV camera that's installed on probably, let's say, on the borders. They need to take into they need to just look into, they need to just find it out whether there is infiltration that's happening. So they need to worried about, or they need to just look into that, okay, the system should be so reliant that if there is some infiltration that's happening, then it should be as quick as just counting to do, right? So they cannot just offer like a high latency. So those are the few applications that normally edge applications are deployed out. uh, and there are few applications. Just look at those artificial intelligence use cases in farming on those distant areas. Just look at those villages, outskirts area where there are no network coverages regularly. How you can use all this power of artificial intelligence to power it along. Just look at the crop temperature, crop humidity, and all those things. So there are few uses where these networks and edge computations normally comes in. So this is a very quick visual of what's cloud versus edge at the cloud is. So many cloud applications get data locally, send them the data for processing, and we talked about this. So this is a bottleneck that you're trying to remove. This transferring back is something that's very costly. And just think about, if we are talking about 1,000 to 1,000 different cameras or video cameras that might be installed. So in this case, when we are doing it at the edge, there is no need to transfer the data back to the cloud. It's going to reside it at the edge, and all those inferencing are going to happen at the edge. So, so it doesn't mean that it's going to be entirely at the edge. There are few cases where, let's say, at the end of the day, a few data might be, or the few model logs or few model dumps might be transferred back to the cloud for higher inferencing. Cloud, we can all obviously use it for training out an AI cloud and can just copy out that model and can deploy it at the edge. We can then do the inferencing at the edge. So just think about this, a very something that we can relate it to the Google Maps that's available on our mobile devices. It doesn't normally, when you're doing, even without a network, right? When if you just saved out all your like maps, and you can obviously use all those GPS and do just move out from one location to other. So all those route planning and all those things, that's happening at the edge. So that's the beauty of the edge. So why is AI at the edge really important? So it about network. It impacts on the network, as I said. Latency considerations are always there, because if you are transferring out a large amount of data here and there, you even end up paying out about those bandwidth that you are using. There are security concerns as well. Let's say I, as an organization, I'm not interested in transferring out my live CCTV data back to the cloud, because there might be some PII information that might be hidden into those CCTVs. I don't want to. Don't want those videos or those images to be offloaded from my from my locations to somewhere in the cloud where I'm not aware of where they are going to get saved. There are few inference optimizations for local inferences as well, where we're using those different things for optimizing out those models to work on those edge inference. So this is something similar to what I said. So network communication can be expensive in cost and bandwidth power consumptions, and even sometimes just think about if we are just deploying it within some sort of a farming interface, the communications can be even impossible where you don't have network coverages and all those things. So how you would probably decide out whether I'm going to deploy that solution on an edge, and there are a lot of different considerations that you need to make. You need to think about latency. So if we just look at real-time decision making, so if you just look at Tesla and all those autopilots that they normally work on, they can't handle latency in making important decisions, right? All they need is they just need like inferencing really quick. If you're just seeing out to, if you're just driving out a Tesla on an autopilot and it sees some human or pedestrians crossing on the road, and if the system isn't doesn't have got a those low latencies, it's going to just bump around that people or the pedestrian out of the road, right? It's going to save, it's going to cost us a human life. So that's the important decisions that you need to make out in just figuring it out whether I need to use in a high latency or a low latency. But even security is also crucial that I talked about. So as I say, that personal or health data is sensitive is sent to the cloud. You don't need to you wouldn't need don't want that your like all those historical or genomics data can be sent back to the cloud, and all those Google and all those different companies can just play around with your genomics data to build out something, right? There might be few people who might allow it, but personally I wouldn't. So even business data, just think about large corporates, the large corporate companies. They don't want their business data to be stolen or sent to the cloud because they have got a lot of different financials and proprietary intellectual properties that they've got. We'll just probably move along like really quick. So optimization at the edge is use some sort of an optimization software. So that's good that you can obviously build out some neural network. But when we talk about inference at the edge, you need to use some sort of an optimization software to just power it along on the edges. It can be made for specific hardware. Like we can say that if you just heard of Intel IoT, IoT Tank, or all those things, they've got built a lot of different applications. So a lot of different specific hardware that can run on those different types of applications. So these are the few of the bunch of edge applications that I wanted to talk about. One is the like self-driving cars. So this is the inferencing is happening at the edge. Nothing is happening on the cloud, right? All the decision it's making on this car itself. There might be few things that it's offloading into the cloud, like after few intervals. The majority of the things happening at the edge. Just look at the wearables, the smart watches that you're wearing in your hands. All those things are happening. All those live heartbeat sensing and all those things happening at the edge. So this is just to kind of relate it to you that these are the edge applications. I'm trying to just clear out your picture that about computer vision. That normally it's normally 60 to 70% of the AI applications of the computer vision applications that you see are going to happen at the edge. Even those robots are powerful. They do carry different computer visions, and even if you have seen those in those automobiles industry just offloading or picking up those heavier parts and moving it around, so they are using some sort of an edge applications in doing it, right? They cannot just offload the data to the cloud and just backtrack it to the edge application. Even it's going right now, it's getting used in wildlife conservations as well, where people have built out a bunch of different solutions by looking at the video feeds or looking at the sounds. They can just say that whether there is an afforestation or deforestation or a poaching of animals that's happening. So you might say that whether edge is for everything. So as I said, that it's normally 80% of the applications that we normally talk about. So it's not actually needed or for everything. Just think about voice assistant. It's likely hang up for a second while you query sent to a server and the response is written, right? If you have heard of if you just use Alexa or even what do you call that? Google Voice Assistant. So normally there is a kind of a lag, and all the inferences are happening at the edge. It doesn't work locally, right? You need that device to be connected to the internet. Even just think about the Mars Hubble that's there to study about the black hole. Does it need to send the data locally? So all these things, the questions that I have written out over here is just to make you sense of whether your computer vision applications that you are building, whether it's need to be an edge deployability or not. So this is just a bunch of history. I would probably skip this. So yeah, so historical context for this is edge computing. So this is kind of pretty new. So I was just reading about this today in the evening. So I thought of sharing this with you. So uh, if you just look at this graph, edge is kind of growing in importance, right? With Geo coming with the 5G next year and those different edge devices that are going in. IoT growth has grown from 2 billion devices in 2006, and they're projecting around 200 billion devices. Just look at this enormity, and just look at the beauty of those applications that you would probably build up at the edges to just power on those applications. So this is the one last thing that I would probably need to talk about, and then I would probably just stop talking and make you less bored. So for building up all these edge computing and all those things that I talked about, you need something called as there are a bunch of different options that are available out there. You can use AWS Greengrass. You can use like NVIDIA's NVIDIA's proprietary softwares, proprietary hardware like Omni and all those things. But I would probably just talk about something that I have used in my industrial experience, that is OpenVINO. So OpenVINO is one of the software that specifically Intel came up with, and it's for specifically for building on those edge applications for computer systems. So this is a very high level overview of how this vision pipeline look like in action. So what the high I'm not going to go into the nitty and gritty of what it is, because it might probably make you haywire. So what I would probably say is what this is, that what Intel OpenVINO is going behind the scene is that by writing out one pipeline to OpenVINO, what you can do is you can just forget about these low-level inferencing requests that you might need to build. So let's say you build up an application and you wanted to provide an API to use all that applications to the end user. So what you can do is by just with a single click, you can just deploy out that applications on a VPU, on a GPU, on a CPU. So whatever the architecture that you have got, you can just play around with that. So it's not that you would need to write down those custom pipelines. So for if you're not using OpenVINO, what you would do is that you would probably write down custom pipelines to work on VPUs, that is virtual processing unit, on GPUs or CPUs. But when we are using OpenVINO, what you can do is you can just care about building out your solutions code. You can just optimize out those solutions. You can use out different models and can just package it around. Just can create out one model out of it, and then what you can just these low level features that you can use the power of OpenVINO. So within a one click, you can use a combinations of these devices, or you can just directly deploy it on a single device, on a single infrastructure, that is GPU, FPGAs, and CPUs. So okay, so this was all it. So now let's do in the first video I dive into the computer visions. Now to leave out, I would probably dive out of it something cool. So I would probably just leave along, and I would probably just play around with this 3-minute video that I normally feel it's really good that I keep on watching. Thank you all of you for listening me. Just open up for a few minutes of the questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, Hitaru. Guys, if you have any questions, the chat box is now open. You can put your questions in the chat. So Rohit has this question. Can it be used for home application? Rohit, if you can just elaborate this question, it would be great. Then Somdatta has this question. Please
I would
suggest some
probably
books
say,
related to the topic.
yeah. For Rohit, I would probably say Rohit try just reading about Jarvis. So that's something that what do you say? Mark Zuckerberg uses it. So Jarvis is something that's a system that's going behind the scene for the home automations that it entirely built it up. And for the resources that I talked about, just try reading about different bunch of different the courses that are going along. So with this COVID, there are a few good things that came along. A lot of universities have opened up their bunch of different courses. And just believe me, it uses to cost around like a bunch of different like high thousands of dollars. So they are like just go along with CS231, and so I would probably just write it around in the comment section. So CS231N is one lecture that you can probably one course that you can probably go along. CS224N is one other course. So these are the few things that you can just go along and try to take a look. On YouTube, there are a bunch of different videos that are going along. So just try to read about it.
All right, thank you. The next question is Nikhil. Is from Nikhil Bhagwat. What kind of courses should we do to get artificial intelligence?
It's a very broad question, I would say. So, Nikhil, what I would say is just try, I would say, wisely use out Google instead of just searching around with a lot of different things. Just search around for a bunch of different courses. Like from MIT is providing a bunch of different courses. They have open sources. Stanford. Just try to go around with the courses that are from these well-known universities. Even just think about just read it out from Oxford and all those things. So there are a bunch of things that are going along. And one other thing that I could probably refer to any one of you is just read about this Fast AI. So Fast AI is a bunch of community that normally uses SOTA results and all those applications. So you can go along with Fast AI. It's totally free. You do not to pay anything, and you can just learn about a lot of different bunch of things. Personally, I've learned a lot of things from there. So you can probably just also take advantage of that.
All right, so there was one more question which was asked by Geeta. Can we use the same thing in ANN like removing NN which are unnecessary?
Yeah, that we can do. So like Geeta, that's anyway happening out through those weights degrading is anyway going to happen through all those techniques that you're going to do, those batch normalizations, or even when you're using training out a neural network, uses something called as when you throw away the weights, right? That's already taken care of. So those unnecessary. So this is when someone says that you need a lot of data to train along the neural network model. It's something like this, right? Because with the data, what you need to figure it out is what are the connections that you need, what are the connections that you need to build up, the new connections that you need, and what are the connections that you need to throw away. So those are the two things that the data normally go along.
All right, so that was the last question we had. The session was really informative that no one had any doubt. No one has any doubts.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for
So
listening me patiently. Patiently, I would say. I speak a lot. I although wanted to cover a lot of different things, but just to respect each other's time, I just tried to bind it up in like a 1.5 hours. So apologies for that if I missed out something. So if you need to ask me anything, just go along. You can just check out my profile on Across the Globe and you can just write down. I would be happy to answer out any questions that you might have. Thank you. Thank you very much.
thank you very much. Thank you very much. The session was really informative, Jitendra, and I personally learned a lot. And thank you very much for agreeing to conduct this webinar. It was great having you here for this online session.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Jitendra. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. So if you have any doubts, you can connect with Mr. Jitendra on across the globe. He'll be happy to answer all of your doubts. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. For all the future events, you will be mailed about all the future events. Thank you very much.